You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. The live stream. Detroit is different in Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit. All right, welcome to Public Comment. This is Thursday, February 8th. Every Thursday morning, 8 a.m., you can check for Public Comment. You're going to get a little bit of local politics. So, the local politics of Detroit City. I'm Khary Frazier of Detroit It's Different, and I'm joined by Malachi Barret of Bridge Detroit that follows the local beat of City Council every week. And you can get that notebook through Bridge Detroit. And also, without any further ado, Mr. Malachi, how are you today?
I'm great, man. Good morning. It's a beautiful day outside.
Oh man, we are loving the sunshine of what's going on now in Detroit that we're welcoming in a February because it's feeling like spring for all of the Detroiters here.
They got that fake spring though, so you gotta
Hilarious.
be careful.
Hilarious.
A couple times.
Yeah, fake spring. You can't, hey, it's a lot of cold flu season too. So give people pound, don't give them play. Khary tip, you know what I'm saying? So, with that being said, man, we're talking what council was talking, the big hot button thing, as we were talking redistricting in the state, which is different than the city. Last week with Sherry Gay Dagnago, I suggest everybody check that out. But the city is redistricting too. It was the big topic of discussion at council this week. So let's get into that introduction first before we get to our next story. Redistricting. What map was voted upon? Why was that map chosen? And what was that discussion like in city council?
Yeah, so after a couple of months, I think this process started really in like November of last year. They have finalized city council district maps that will take place after the 2025 municipal elections. So nothing changes for now. Your district remains the same. Your city council member remains the same until the next election. Yeah, they chose the sixth and final option that was created by the Planning Commission. It was actually a special request of the council president to create maps that looked a little bit, well, basically the idea was try to make it as close as possible to what is currently the district boundaries. What's tricky about this, and it's required by the city charter after the release of census data every 10 years, and has to be kind of based on population changes. And the districts have to be as close to equal in population as possible. What's tricky about this, though, is there was a big population loss on the east side of the city compared to the west side. So proportionally, those east side districts had to get bigger to basically contain more people to make them more equal. And that caused kind of cascading changes for the other districts. Pros and cons. There were some folks that came out of this process feeling like they were able to retain the boundaries that they thought were important. There were other neighborhoods that were not as lucky and will find themselves in new districts. What's been kind of interesting to me as we've been talking to folks about this is like how emotional people get over these lines on paper, right? Because it's connected to really their block level efforts to organize and get resources and build relationships with the city. So when folks come out from the Gricksdale Farms neighborhoods or where we are in Hope Village and they say we really want to remain in D2, that's important to them because they've worked with people at the community advisory council. They've worked with their city council member. They have these kinds of relationships, and I think it's yet to be seen what happens. These won't take effect for a little while, but does this really affect how easy it is for people to get help, the momentum that they've been building in their neighborhoods? There's some anxiety about whether that could disrupt some of the work that they've been doing.
I personally think, as a board member of Hope Village Revitalization and a resident in Hope Village, the community, I definitely know Jeff Jones was one of those people that was down there and saying like, yo, I don't support this map process. Every map I saw, 1 through 6, had my neighborhood now a part of District 5. But when you even look at the original map, it's kind of like we're a cluster that kind of sits on the outside of District 5. So moving forward, the momentum, just so people get the perspective of this, similar to what we were speaking about last week with redistricting, is the relationships. You've built relationships. There are projects that are ongoing. One of the big projects here is it will be an equestrian farm coming in the footprint of what was Paul Robeson Academy. I don't know if a lot of people know that. Like, where is that? Linwood and Finkel, like that area. So if people are familiar with my neighborhood, you know, that equestrian farm is a big project for our neighborhood. And in D2, but now in D5, we're downtown, we're midtown. It's a lot of other projects that we could look at just from a lot of the way resourcing has been delivered throughout the city and say, we're not going to get those same considerations because this would have been amazing in D2, but now in D5, it'll be looked at and possibly lost in the sauce. And you all posed a really good question, like, you know, where do these maps really matter? Other things that really happen too is then we have to look at it from the other angle and lane. If the districts stay the same, which they won't because this is census stuff, and then you look up and you continue to end up with like certain districts that may have, you know, let's say 30, 40,000 less residents but just as much influence. So what impact does that have? Or maybe less influence, it'll be less thought about. Like, you know, i I understand the principle of what it is. There were many variables of that went into the drawing of the maps, as I saw one of those presentations, and from the planning commission. It's you want to keep the integrity of these communities, and technically, if the community is on the border of it, it's not like now that like part of the district is in D1 and the other is in D4. You know what I'm saying? It will compromise, you know, that organization working together. It just changes the variance, and possibly that means that maybe that organization could have more power. I mean, it's so many ways to look at this. It could be just as many positives as negatives. It just all depends on the organizing and what resources could be there.
Yeah, I mean, similarly to some of the arguments that are being made on redistricting at the state level, you know, if you were to be optimistic about how D5 has changed, you would say, well, not now, but after the next election, if let's just assume all the council members stay the same, which they won't, you know, we know they're not going to. People are not going to run for re-election. They'll run for other offices. People will run against them, whatever. You know, today D5 is represented by the council president. So optimistically, you could say, okay, here we are. We're in D5 now. Maybe that means that we have a better chance of getting things passed because she has more political influence, right? Mr. Jones also, you know, to what you were kind of talking to, the mix match of the kind of economic situation people in these different neighborhoods, right? So you've got Hope Village. Then you also have in D5, these new maps will include, you know, East Village. As you mentioned, it'll include downtown, midtown. It'll include a lot of these interests. I mean, it spreads basically from this northwest corner that we're in here all the way to like Connor Creek. So it's a pretty wide, and all of these, you know, there's little nuances we kind of into here, but yeah, I think these maps are really important. And what's important too is that, you know, whoever is representing them actually understands what's going on, you know, in the neighborhood level. They understand the you know, the dynamics there and are able to actually listen to them. That was kind of what he ended with. Jeffrey Jones was like, look, don't forget about us as you work on these other things. Don't forget about what we've got going on here. But you know, Sherry Burton from Midwest Civic Council of Block Clubs, a little bit further south on the west side here, was pretty satisfied that she was able to stay in D6. And you know, she talked about this a lot too, that basically you build this kind of circle of block clubs and local people that are really invested in doing things and fixing up and bringing resources down. And they've already kind of been through this wave of disinvestment. And so that kind of context, that historic, like we've spent all this time trying to build back up. That's where a lot of the worry comes from. But you know, she feels good that she's able to maintain in D6 and keep those relationships going. So we're going to see a lot of like little stories like that at the micro level. And that's, I'm interested to kind of hear more from people about how this actually affects them.
Definitely. Definitely. As we continue to the next story, which is very interesting. Good title, as they say, comic book fantasy or useful tool. There is a Bolowrap that is being looked at, voted upon by council, where the police will basically have a lasso like tool, and it's created and called the Bolowrap. You all are looking at it right there.
It's like a little handheld launcher thing. So that's about the size of like, a stun gun or a phone or something like that, water bottle. Basically, it shoots out these. I mean, Scott Benson said it's something like Batmanish. It's like something Batman would have on his utility belt. Yeah.
Which is hilarious.
Let's not
That's
make
said. Period. I mean, just
yeah.
the whole premise of it, but it from what's looked at, and this being something that was stated like almost like, oh, just look at it like it's a handcuff. I'm pretty sure this is not like a handcuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Let me describe. And this is the tricky thing, right? Is like it's being described in news articles and in police presentations around the country as I was doing research on this. Like a lot of people are making the comparison to like, oh, it's like a comic book thing. It's like what I mean, this is a police tool. Let's be serious about it. This is the way it's being talked about though. So that's kind of why I reference it that way.
Yeah.
But this is it's a launcher. It shoots this like Kevlar rope that's about 8 feet long. It's got a weight on both sides. And so that when it hits something, it hits, your legs or your wrists or your ankles or whatever. The two weighted ends wrap around and it immediately kind of snaps tight and restrains people. It shoots out at like 640 feet per second, according to a city report. And I've seen some videos. You can actually go on to Wrap Technologies is the company the city's trying to buy this from. And they've got a ton of videos like showing body cam footage of this stuff being used. It's very quick. It's like this loud shot and then the person is like restrained kind of with a rope. So the city's already using these. I don't know how many they have, but the mental health co-response team that arrives to people who are having mental health emergencies, they've been carrying these. Apparently, it's only been deployed once in the field. DPD said it was successful. We don't really know the details of like what that incident were, but this was rolled out as part of a kind of group of non-lethal tools. There was a demonstration done at Huntington Place with city council members that the police did. There was a Detroit news story about it. I think it was in like maybe 2022 or early last year. There's a number of things that they are trying to buy that are kind of alternatives to
lethal force.
Lethal force, basically.
And you see even in the picture that I have up right here, kind of a little bit of like what it will look like. That definitely looks like the type of guy that would be in law enforcement and look to be in a neighborhood like mine using that thing. But that's just my perspective. All right. But with that being said, you see right there in that picture, like as you say, like the weighted wraps that go around. I mean, this is kind of similar to like hog tying people and things like that. So stated in our State of Black Detroit, I believe Nancy Parker said it eloquently, that finding new and more creative ways of detaining Black folks, arresting Black folks, capturing Black folks was what she spoke of, and this kind of goes into that arc. And it's interesting that you said that the mental health response team are currently the group that have this, because I can only imagine, you know what I'm saying? Like if I'm going through something very traumatic, an episode, and now like I see something I've never seen and it wraps me up, that could be, I don't know even how I'm responding to that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The idea that this is so from police, the argument is that this is a safer tool to restrain somebody that's having a mental health crisis. So this is all, shadowed by the death of Porter Burks in 2022. He was shot 19 times by police while he was having a mental health episode.
Yeah.
And police, said that he had a knife on him and had kind of started to charge them. This tool would allow them, I guess, theoretically, it fires 10 to 25 feet away. So keeping a distance to fire this thing and kind of wrap them up, right? So that's what police say this would be useful for. It's better than, having to use lethal force or getting close and tackle somebody to the ground or something like that. Then there were also a lot of residents who voiced concerns about, is this safe? Are we being kind of taken for a ride by another police technology company that is making money off of creating these gadgets, basically. And there was a woman from Detroit Disability Power, their policy policy person, basically saying, like, why don't we just take this money and put it into like resources for people who are
Yeah.
potentially going to be faced with police when they're having a mental health crisis? Why don't you use this to help us get any number of things, right? We know how under-resourced the mental health situation in our country is. Ultimately, the council had delayed voting on this contract, which would have cost like $32,000. So, in context, relatively small amount of police spending compared to what we normally see coming through the council. But they delayed voting on this so that they could speak with advocacy groups like Detroit Disability Power and folks in the mental health space to get a better idea of, like, is this actually better than what police are currently doing, or does this kind of introduce a host of new problems?
It's yeah, Lord knows, which kind of takes us to the next topic. And most of these public comment discussions, it's just highlighting what's happening, how things are happening, so you can have some information condensed to have a better understanding of some of the things that are happening in Impulsive Council. We'll have some updates actually on Detroit Public School Community District. I was going to let you know about that pretty soon. So we'll be getting some updates on that as count day is coming there. So it's things happening there, but that's what this discussion is for. And this is one of the things. Now, our next topic is something that's been in talks through the city of Detroit, I think, since I was a child, and that's demolition contracting, and the cost of demolishing structures, homes, buildings throughout the city of Detroit, and what's fair and how that spending is happening and moving along. Council members were grilling the top lawyer, the council of Conrad Mallett, as we know, about the discussion sparked by demolition contracts paid for with federal pandemic relief funds. So that's that ARPA funding. The council voted to approve 16.6 million in demolition funding across a dozen contracts opposed by James Tate, Santiago-Romero, and Whitfield Calloway. Corporation Counsel Mallett said the demolition department has so far collected $978,144 through legal proceedings. Lawsuits were filed against 17 property owners to demand payment for demolition work, Mallett said. So I know you're going to get more context to this, but this is one of those discussions that just looms in Detroit. Demolition, how things are demolished, who's paying for it, the bills and the taxes being associated with demolished properties, which sometimes can be looked at like this. It's like, as I live in a neighborhood where oftentimes homes are going to be demolished, and flipping that bill oftentimes is being sent to some taxpayer, somebody that clearly has abandoned said property or structure. You know what I'm saying? So it's back to space needing to be demolished or condemned and demolished, and what that goes through. And I have a special guest and someone you should talk to that's being said, like, hey, they're saying my property should be condemned and demolished, but I don't think so. um and then you have another person that's like, barely keeping this going, but public safety, as we know, the big fight that really was the thing to usher in the executive action of Mayor Duggan was fighting blight. At the time, I mean, I don't know if people remember this, but the discussions of ruin porn. With Phil Cooley, my homie Phil Cooley, shout out Phil. I ain't seen him in a minute, but Phil Cooley would talk about, how people would come from across the world to to experience the ruin porn in Detroit. I mean, these are not talking points current, but this was a talking point, at the start of the executive body of Mayor Duggan. And what's happening, the money spent on demolishing structures, and where is it going, all through the shadows of bankruptcy. Like, this has been like a hot button topic. And it even kind of goes back to Mayor Kilpatrick and Mayor Archer. I'm pretty sure it may have been around sometimes with Mayor Young. I was just too young to remember, but it's been a discussion oftentimes where council and mayor have had um, some different looks at the accounting, the practices, the execution of demolition. So let's get you to break down some of what's happening here, my brother.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this has been something that's been simmering for a while through the American Rescue Plan Act, the federal pandemic relief. Detroit was injected with like $800 million to use on a lot of things, but demolition has been one of the big spending categories. So every week we see, millions of dollars in demolition contracts getting approved by the city council, and it's made a big difference in, I think, to what you were speaking to earlier about, like, people were just kind of sitting on demo orders for a long time. They were getting that, that charge from the city that something needed to come down, and either people didn't have the money for it or they had long abandoned the property, and that, it wasn't coming down. It was basically standing there and kind of getting worse and causing issues for folks in the area. So, the Doug administration has said that the ARPA funding has really helped them address that problem directly and get in there and start tearing down these houses in a really aggressive way. Council, and particularly Tate, Whitfield, Calloway, and Santiago-Romero, who voted against these contracts, are looking for more accountability of, like, are we going to get, what are we doing about the owners of this property? Like, are they going to have to ever be accountable and pay for basically the subsidizing demolition? Not all these contracts were privately owned, I should say. Some of them were publicly owned. I don't have a breakdown in there, but out of that 16 million.
But let's be clear. If it is a publicly owned property, chances are at one point in time it was seized and it was private, and then it was seized. You know what I'm saying? So it's like it
I mean, the city is getting ownership of property right now through legal proceedings with, they're suing property owners that own blight, and they're getting control of those properties, and then they're demolishing it. So that's a good point.
And then that becomes tough. But even like the story we ran and we're speaking about last week, that this was the year that more properties ended up from the tax rolls back in the coffers. Because people weren't able to meet the timeline of repairs. And going back to like even the home repair program, like so much of this stuff is so interconnected, because the it's always, I shouldn't say like it, demolition is a lot easier than construction, obviously, especially if we're constructing and rehabbing something. If we're constructing and rehabbing something, the cost, the time, the intentionality, it takes a different type of persistence. And this also reframes where people say, okay, it's not enough housing. Like so many of these issues, I feel like the more we do public comment, I feel like it's a game of Sim City where it's like, damn, you know what I'm saying? Well, okay. First off, it was this game called Sim City that nerds like me used to play like way back in the day, where you like replicate running a city. So you'd be like, oh, I'm gonna put this here and I'm gonna put the airport right by here, and then like you would have people protesting because it's like, I don't want to live next door to an airport and things like that. So it's like everything is so interconnected in community. Hence, more of the relationships are so needed to be healed about the whole scope of this, because in this, I think there are certain people that are losing in houses where they should be, like hence people like me as a neighbor in this. It was a lot of houses that ended up on the tax rolls that I think people would have rather been in. So hence, let them stay in the houses. Taxes, we know, were overassessed. This is one of the most hot button issues that since we both met, and under the whole ARPA funding, that the community said ARPA funding should go back to pay back people that were overassessed in tax, which goes back to the lead counsel of Conrad Malice saying, nope, we can't send money directly to residents, but you can send money to demolish these same properties that possibly were overtaxed from residents. You know what I'm saying? So it's so many discussion points on this that sometimes just lead to so many people just having apathy of the whole system. Like, oh man, everything's against us. I just give up on the whole thing, And then people on the inside are like, no, but it's layers and we can do some things. So issues like this present itself because this definitely leads for people such as myself more along the line of community to say, well, damn, if we can pay a demolition contractor, even though I know that's more pennies on the dollar, why can't we pay people back for the money that was overtaxed? Why do we have to go through like, okay, well, then that's breaking state code and you got to go through things in the state budget and then it could even go up to the federal Supreme Court. But to demolish things is questions about this.
I think the number really to watch on this too, you know, totally. We definitely talk about all of that quite a bit. I think you know when it comes to are we getting the money back from these demo contracts, the number to watch is at 30%, right? So we've recovered about 30% of what we spent on commercial demolitions so far through legal proceedings and suing these landlords and getting court orders to have us get paid back. Is that going to get to 100%? Is it going to get to 50%? Is it going to 75%? Right. I think that's what city council is really going to be looking for. This is going to take a lot of time. You know, the demolition is ongoing. We have ARPA funds to spend for a couple of years still. And then these court cases themselves can take, 10 months to a year to resolve. Right. So that's something just to kind of keep an eye on, that's what I'm going to be kind of watching. Are we getting, are we recovering what we're spending on this from the folks that arguably should be footing the bill in the first place, right?
Yeah, and then this comes out of money, ARPA money that was meant to infuse options connected to the impacts of COVID-19 in a city like Detroit.
Yeah.
So
it's really interesting to me, like what qualifies as being a pandemic
relief
impact and what doesn't, right? Like I don't know. That's not up for me to decide, obviously, but it's a big umbrella, and then at other times it's not, and there are certain things that like can't be used, and you're kind of like, well, why?
Well, once again, I know we went a little overtime with this one, but I figured we were going to go overtime with these 3 topics. Stay tuned for public comment every Thursday, 8 a.m. We try to button it up within that 20 minutes. We're going to make that 20 minutes. And also make sure you're reading Malachi's notebook. It was a couple other stories we were thinking about, something also housing related, more federal, talking about HUD and what HUD needs to be invested in fair share in Detroit, things like that. But Malachi, let the people know how to connect.
bridgedetroit.com. You can sign up for our free newsletters there. They pop in your inbox every morning. Mine goes out on Wednesday, breaking down city council news. We also have other newsletters that cover culture, the food scene here in Detroit, and just kind of general news that you need to know. We're also on social. Go find us on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and Facebook and Snapchat, and not Snapchat, but wherever else
where it is. And actually shout out Orlando takes the chops and puts this on Instagram, but YouTube, Facebook here. Also give to Bridge. I gotta renew and give because I got my letter my email from Stephen Henderson the other day, but I need to set up a link to give to Detroit is different too. After the 10 year, we gonna do that. So thank you so much.
Peace.